Hey guys, it's Bang from about PC Gaming here, and welcome to my NVIDIA GTX 1080 SLI review. Now, the whole reason I've decided to make this video is because there seems to be a real lack of in-depth videos about the SLI experience, and I feel I am now in a great position to show off NVIDIA's scalable link interface technology. SLI really does divide opinion, and you'll find most people are either strongly for or against it completely. Some of the most common arguments against SLI that I've come across is too much extra heat and noise, too expensive, not enough game support, and my personal favourite, micro stutter. Before I kick things off, let me quickly go through the hardware I'm using. So I'm using two NVIDIA GTX 1080 Founders Edition cards, and I'm using some hybrid cooling solutions, so that will eliminate any throttling issues, and I'll be running a slight overclock as well, which I'm demonstrating now. Also, I'm using the Intel i7-5960X, which has 40 PCI Express lanes, which allows me to run both cards at maximum bandwidth of 16x16, and I'll also have the addition of a high bandwidth bridge. So this is pretty much the best you can get in terms of an SLI experience. Anyway guys, time for some games, and I'm going to kick off with my very favourite, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Okay, just to quickly go through the settings now before I do anything else. I'm using a resolution of 3840 by 2160, otherwise known as 4K. NVIDIA Hairworks is enabled with no anti-aliasing, and everything else is set to ultra. In post-processing, motion blur is disabled, and also anti-aliasing again is disabled, and everything else has been enabled. So we're here in Novigrad, one of the most demanding areas in the game, and as you can see, scaling is pretty good. 90%, in the high 90s when it comes to the GPU load. And frames per second is in the 80s to the 90s, so this is at 4K, so imagine if you're someone that's interested in 1440p, what kind of frames per second you'd be getting. Milliseconds are pretty low as well, as you can see there, within the 10 to the 15 range, which is very smooth. One thing I would say about The Witcher 3 is it is a smooth experience, but when you do walk up to someone and you start talking, that a few seconds before you may have a little hitch here and there. It doesn't always happen, but that is something I've found regularly in the game. But otherwise the experience is a pretty really good SLI experience, and if I had to give it a 1 to 5, I'll give it a 4, because it's almost perfect when it comes to performance and smoothness. Next up is Rise of the Tomb Raider, one of the games I really enjoyed of 2016, so I want to quickly go through the settings again. I'm using a resolution of 3840 by 2160. When I go to the graphics settings, everything's at very high, which is the highest it can go. Ambient occlusion method is HBAO+. You can use VXAO, but it's extremely demanding. And also I'm using the pure hair settings at very high, which is the maximum. So these are the settings I'm using. Rise of the Tomb Raider scales extremely well when it comes to SLI. This game is by far one of the smoothest games I've played in multi-GPU configuration. You will not find any issues with micro stuttering with this game. Not only that, the performance is really good. You can expect between 80 and at the minimum around the low 60s. And this game, if you want to play it in 4K with the settings I used, you will definitely need 2 graphics cards. A Titan X is not going to give you a solid 60 frames per second. The only choice you do have is a multi-GPU configuration, unfortunately. So moving on to some of the more demanding areas, even in the snowy areas like the Soviet installation, you'll still get very consistent frames per second in the high 70s, and at the minimum the low 60s. So I can't recommend this game enough if you do want to try it out at 4K in SLI. Next up is the immensely popular Overwatch. Really good arena shooter game. So I'm going to go through the settings now. I'm using a resolution of 3840 by 2160 and a field of view of 103. When it comes to advanced performance stats, there is nothing really in here that affects your gameplay itself. So looking at the actual quality of the game, I've got that the Epic preset. Just to show you what settings are in the Epic preset, as you can see, anisotropic filtering at 16 times, ambient occlusion, you can even see ultra settings for anti-aliasing as well, so fully maxed out. Overwatch, when it comes to the SLI experience, I'm not too sure where to start. This game is pretty much as best as it's ever gonna get when it comes to scaling and the SLI experience. This is what I like to call the gold standard. The game pretty much gives you 100% scaling, so that is double the performance. Not only that, the smoothness of the game is just unreal. If you look at the milliseconds, which is next to the frames per second, you can see it's not even going over 7 or 8, so absolutely fantastic performance. I can't give it any more praise. If I had to rate it between 1 and 5, it would definitely get a 5 when it comes to scaling. So if you're someone that plans to invest in a high refresh rate 4K monitor in the future, then this game will definitely be a treat. Okay, moving on to Battlefield 1. Going through the options now. I'm using a resolution of 3840 by 2160 once again. Field of view is around 85 for both vehicle and general field of view. 200 frames per second limit, and everything else is at ultra with ambient occlusion, HBO plus, and anti-aliasing FXAA medium. So what I'm going to do is conquest mode, 64 player map, which is generally the most demanding mode of the game. Battlefield 1 performs pretty well when it comes to SLI. The performance scaling is definitely not 90%, it's just a bit under. Not the best scaling in my opinion from a DICE game, but it does help you achieve way over 60 frames per second at 4K at ultra settings, so that's definitely something to be happy about. The experience is smooth, that's definitely another positive as well. You won't really get any micro stutter, so I can't really complain too much when it comes to Battlefield 1 and the SLI experience. But what I would say is it has improved massively since it was launched. You still do get a bit of flickering when it comes to some of the menu options. You'll find when you complete a map and it's time to switch to a new map, you might get some flashing textures, but they've improved on that quite a bit as well. So scaling isn't that great in my opinion, and it does have a few bugs that need to be ironed out, but generally the experience is nothing to be sniffed at. If you're 144 Hz man at 1440p, this is guaranteed to get you to that target of performance, especially if you're even got a 165 Hz monitor. It will definitely hold that as well. So it could be better, but it's not the worst. So 3 out of 5 for me, and you know, let's just see if it improves in the future. So next up is Crysis 3. Going through the settings now, using a resolution of 3840 by 2160, anti-aliasing method is FXAA, and everything else is at very high. Going into the advanced settings, as you can see, everything's at very high with anisotropic filtering at 16 times with motion blur disabled. Crysis 3, as we all know, is a very demanding game. It's been crippling GPUs for a very long time, and especially if you want to run it at 4K, then you're going to need something special. A Titan X will just about get under 60 frames per second at the same settings, so you will need a multi-GPU configuration if you do intend to run 4K very high settings and get over 60 frames per second. Scaling on the CryEngine is very good, so you are going to be getting around 95% scaling, which is definitely a good thing. Very smooth experience as well. I personally didn't experience any micro stutter, and if there was any, it was very minimal and few and far in between, so definitely nothing to worry about in that department. Overall performance, you can expect lows of 60 frames at times, the low 60s, but generally you will be hovering around 80, going up to the high 90s. This is a very demanding level called Welcome to the Jungle. Plenty of foliage, water, very detailed level, harsh on the CPU as well, so it's good to have the cores if you do intend to push these two cards. So those are some of the positives of NVIDIA's SLI, and as you can see, it works pretty well on a pair of NVIDIA GTX 1080s, but I can't avoid the elephant in the room that is not all games support SLI, unfortunately. One of those games is Gears of War 4. Now this game, unfortunately, like all other Microsoft Windows Store titles, do not support SLI, so you will have to make do with one of your GPUs. So in this case, you'll be experiencing just the performance of a single GPU, which kind of is annoying when you've got, you know, hundreds of pounds worth of GPU horsepower just sitting there idle. So as you can see, guys, in Gears of War, at ultra settings at 4K, getting around 40 frames per second and a bit higher. So not the 60 frames that would be desirable, but you know, we are forced to use one card. So these are one of the situations where having an SLI configuration doesn't always pay off. So just bear that in mind. Not all games are going to support both of your cards. So my advice to anyone that wants to go SLI, make sure you choose cards that are adequately cooled, because that will play a big, you know, have a big impact on performance, especially with the GTX 1080s with GPU boost. And also make sure, you know, you try to choose something with the best profile in terms of audio. You don't want it to be too loud and screaming in your system. And the last thing I would say as well, if you are going SLI, try to go SLI with the most powerful cards you can afford, because in situations like this, you need to have a card that can handle itself on its own, and obviously a GTX 1080 is no slouch by itself. So that's my advice to anyone who wants to go SLI. For me and my personal needs, this is a good setup for myself, but for someone else it may not be the best choice, so just bear that in mind. Hopefully this video has been useful to anyone that's considering buying two GTX 1080s, and with the recent price cut, this might be a popular subject. So anyway, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.
The sky, we finna light it up. We ain't never coming down. See the people showing love. Say what's up when I'm around. They were saying it was love, but we see them in the crowd now. We too young to give a fuck. All we know is that for now, I said what's up,